The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 14th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Now when Jesus heard about the beheading of John the Baptist, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. When the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away, so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled. And they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. The Gospel of the Lord. So a very, very long time ago, I was a seminary intern. Internship is the 3rd year of our 4-year seminary process when you work full-time in a congregation as kind of a student pastor under the supervision of an actual pastor. And I did my internship in Northeast Pennsylvania, and I was blessed to have a really great congregation and a really great supervisor to work with. I was their 8th vicar in a row. They called the interns the vicars. And there was a long-standing tradition of working with the vicars. They knew all the traditions and all the things that you should do to help the vicars along in their 3rd year of seminary. And one of those traditions was that when the pastor went on vacation, the vicar was in charge, and somebody would die while the vicar was there, and the pastor was gone, and the vicar would have to do the funeral. And so in keeping with that tradition, the year that I was there, someone died almost immediately after the pastor left on vacation. This really was not a surprise, as this person had been on his way out, and the pastor and I figured that this would be the person who was going to die while the pastor was on vacation. And so, as we expected, I helped the family after the person died, and I worked with them to plan the funeral, and I led the funeral service. And about 3 weeks later, after the pastor had come back from vacation, we ended up sitting down and talking about all the things that had happened while he was away. And he says to me, "You know, whenever this happens, and somebody dies especially, you know, I talk to the family, I talk to the other people who were at the service, and I really try to like draw out of them what they really thought about you and how you did the stuff, right? Because you want to make sure that they feel like, you know, if there was something else, you need to learn from this experience." And I said, "Yes, I know, I should figure this out." And he says, "So here's what I want to tell you. This is kind of funny, but it just goes to show what makes an impression on people. So everybody seemed to like the way you did the service and how you worked with the family and your sermon. All that stuff was great. But the thing that really impressed them, more than anything else, and everybody mentioned this, was when you got back from the gravesite, we came back to the church, we went to the fellowship hall, and the ladies had set up a reception in the fellowship hall, but there were not enough tables set up. And you helped set the tables up. That was what people were really impressed about, tables. I thought I was doing all this great theological pastoral work, and apparently that was fine too. But it was with helping set up the tables that they really had a remembrance of what I did. That was the thing that really had an impact when they talked to the pastor about my performance. I am not sure why setting up tables was so important. I mean, I was 24 years old. I should be one of the guys that was running around and setting up the tables anyway, but my intern supervisor was right. Often, it's really funny what gets remembered and what makes an impact on other people. I always kind of think about that story whenever I read the story of the feeding of the 5,000. So, as you may know, one of the reasons we got 4 Gospels in the New Testament is that they often tell different stories about what Jesus did, including the miracles that Jesus performed. Occasionally, one or more of these miracles shows up in a different gospel. But there is only one miracle that Jesus performed that shows up in all 4 Gospels. Only one, and it's this story about Jesus feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. This event, apparently, was the one thing that Jesus did that everybody remembered and everybody talked about. In some ways, it's kind of like setting up tables. Because honestly, I would expect that something bigger and more life-altering would be remembered more than a picnic on a hillside. Instead of 5 loaves and 2 fish, you'd maybe expect that the miracle that would be remembered in all 4 Gospels would be something like raising somebody from the dead. That, to me, would have an impact. And in fact, in all 4 of the Gospels, Jesus does raise somebody from the dead, but it's a different person and a different story. You might think instead that maybe somebody who was healed of an incurable disease, born blind from birth or something like that, would be the thing that everybody remembered. And Jesus does cure people in all 4 Gospels, but they are different stories, and there are different people that get remembered. And really, if you were going to remember something that was about food and drink and something like that, you'd think of something more gastronomically kind of interesting than bread or fish. So I would vote for turning water into wine. Hundreds of gallons of wine, that would be the thing that I would remember. And yet, it was the bread and the fish, shared with 5,000 people in the middle of a lonely place, that got remembered more than anything else. Somehow, God's love and presence in the real lives of people came about through a simple act of disciples sharing their food, and through that simple sharing, Jesus providing a meal. That apparently had an even greater impact than dramatic healings or resuscitations from the dead. And I think that's an important point to this story, no matter which gospel it appears in. It's often the little things that get remembered. It's often the small things that have the biggest impact in people's lives. It's often the ordinary things through which people sense God's presence. We live in a world right now in which we are constantly bombarded with news of the big and world-altering problems all around us. And every time I look at my news feed or glance through my social media feeds, I am reminded of the big problems that probably, sadly, I cannot do anything about. And yet, very often I'm told, or it's implied to me, that if I just tried harder, or joined the right protest group, or supported the right relief causes, I could be part of a big and miraculous thing that would have an impact on everything, from ending wars and political corruption to solving world hunger and climate change. Honestly, it's good to be concerned about those problems and to do what we can to help solve them. But mostly, I don't have much more ability to have an impact on those things than the first disciples did on liberating people from the Romans, rooting out temple corruption, or feeding everybody who needed to be fed. And if they spent all their time and energy focusing on those things, they would probably end up feeling dismayed and hopeless. And there's also a lot of dismay and hopelessness going around in our society and our world right now. And sometimes it's because we're seduced by the idea that we really are, in and of ourselves, incredibly so smart and powerful enough that we can change anything we want if we just tried harder or were more committed. And sometimes it's because we're looking for something that we can do that will make a big and dramatic difference and quickly and immediately have a huge impact and change the world. But today's story reminds us that it's often the little things that had the impact and got remembered. It's often the small things that make a difference in people's lives, and it's often through normal things that we do in the course of our everyday lives that we end up making God's presence a living reality in the lives of others. So as we enter August now at Prince of Peace, we are getting a break from some of the big programming events of the year. I feel a sense of relief when we don't have to be planning yard sale or vacation Bible school or some of these great big things that we're doing. But we're using this month to do a lot of kind of little things, but that actually make a difference, a real difference in people's lives. So since VBS, we're collecting stuff for comfort cases for kids in foster care. recognizing that there are kids who have nothing as they move from house to house, and they're literally taking things in trash bags with them and feeling like we're trash. So we give them things to help them feel like they're actual real human beings who we care about. And they come with, stuffed animals and towels and things like that, and actual real backpacks and things like that they can carry things in. And that makes a difference in the lives of kids who we will never meet. And we're collecting school supplies, and we do this every year for kids in Montgomery County who do not have the right supplies to start school. And that not only gives them the physical stuff that they need, they got pencils, they got pens, they got paper, they got this kind of stuff, but it makes them feel like when they walk into class, they are equal to and equipped the same way as everybody else, and that they're valued. And that makes a difference. And we continue to do what we do every month here. We bring in food for Gaithersburg Help. All the time, there's food in the corner, there's food in the baskets, brought in by us, brought in by other people. It makes a difference in the lives of people who every week have to show up and say, I don't have enough to feed my family, but because of what we do, they get something to eat. In a sense, these things, they sound like setting up tables. It is the normal stuff that people need every day and every year, not unlike a meal for those 5,000 folks. They needed a meal on a hill that day, and they would need a meal later on too. But in that moment, the disciples made a difference. And in supplying a need, even just for right now for this person, you make a difference. You have an impact. And often, you make God's love and care a reality in a way that even a fancy miracle might not. It's important to remember that the disciples did not solve world hunger through this event. They did not learn a secret technique for feeding people in the future. And in the short term, this is maybe most important, they were just as clueless to what was going on as the people they helped. They had no idea how this was going to make a difference. But in being open to Jesus' call to share what they had in that moment, they fed people who needed to be fed that day. They made an impact in that moment. And they did something that made the love and presence of God a living reality in the lives of people who needed it, and people remembered that. My intern supervisor was right. It's often funny what people notice and what gets remembered. The story of the feeding of 5,000 reminds us of this. But even more, the story reminds us to be open to Jesus' call to share what we have, even when we don't see how it can make a dramatic difference. The story reminds us to focus on the needs in front of us, rather than whether meeting the need will get noticed by anybody or not. And maybe most of all, the story reminds us that Jesus is always working through us, even when we don't realize it, to make an impact in the lives of others.